Hey, what's up, everyone? So we started discussing a couple of nights ago. We started talking about the halachot of Pesukei deZimra. So we'll carry on with that. And going through Pnei Halacha. We spoke a little bit about what Pesukei deZimra are, the prakim of Tehillim and others that we say beginning of Shacharit in order to preface our tefillah before we get to bakashot. Before we start asking for our own needs, we want to begin with praise. That's the order, as we explained. That's the order of the brachot in the Shemona Esrei itself. We begin with Sheva. Afterwards, we have bakasha, request, and afterwards hoda'ah, thanksgiving. But the general order of tefillah as well, we begin with praise before we get into bakasha. And the Pesukei deZimra helps us, or at least it's meant to help us, get into the proper framework as we get into the rest of our tefillah. So we started talking about what Pesukei deZimra consists of, right? And we saw how in the days of the Gemara, it was not necessarily, at least originally, it was not a fixed order the way that we have it nowadays. The essence of Pesukei deZimra is Ashrei, the parak of Tehillim, which actually Ashrei comes from somewhere else, but that begins with Tehillah David, what we colloquially know as Ashrei, and the next five prakim, the Halalukas. That is the essence of Pesukei deZimra. After to explain how Hodu was added on, a collection of psukim which were connected to the Korban Tamid, and that's why we have the two different minhagim. That our minhag is to say, Ashkenazi minhag is to say Hodu after Baruch Shama, in order that everything should be included within the brachot, within the Mizgeret, the framework of the brachot of Pesukei deZimra, whereas the custom of the Sfaradim and Nusach Sfarad as well is to say Hodu before Baruch Shama. The advantage when you say Hodu before Baruch Shama is that obviously everybody should follow their own minhag. But the advantage is that you aren't allowed to talk, you aren't allowed to interrupt. We'll get into this. In between the brachot, once we say the bracha Baruch Shama, that's the opening bracha. We get to Yishtabach, which is the closing bracha. We can't interrupt for anything in between. If you have not yet said the bracha Baruch Shama, so it's easier to interrupt. Obviously, if there's things that need to be said. So that's an advantage of saying Hodu beforehand. But again, the reason why it's done according to those minhagim is in order that it should be closer to the Korban Tamid. Okay, so then it says here further, Otiknu, Lomar Lifnei Ashrei Kovet Psukim HaPotchim Behi Chavod. There's that section of starting Behi Chavod. Shesh Bem Chizuk HaEmunah B'Shem V'Geulat Yisrael V'Ha'ali Elchiv V'Viur Sodotav. Okay, a lot of secrets here, a lot of things according to Kabbalah, but essentially Behi Chavod, those Psukim are strengthen our Emunah and strengthen our faith in Geulat Yisrael. L'char Mikem B'Tkufat HaGeonim. So then we get later on to the Tkufat of the Geonim. This is after the Gemara. And then they started to add on Pesukei deZimra od prakim v'psukim, additional verses and chapters. Tiknu lama mizmor letodah. Right, we say the mizmor Tehillim parak kuf. Mizmor letodah shamu Chazal shekol hashirot atidot libatel chutz mimenu. This is the midrash in Vayikra Rabbah. It says all these songs in the future will be nullified except for mizmor letodah. Therefore, it should be sung. אין אומרים אותו בשבתות ימים טובים, אלא אומרים במקומו מזמור של יום השבת. On Shabbat and Yom Tov, we don't say מזמור לתודה, we say מזמור של יום השבת instead. ולמנהג האשכנזים הוא כנגד קורבן תודה שהיו בו לחמי חמץ. That's our minhag. We say that מזמור לתודה corresponds to the קורבן תודה. קורבן תודה was brought together with 40 loaves. Many of those loaves were chametz as well, and therefore on days when one could not consume, would not be able to consume those loaves of chametz, we would not bring the Korban Todah, and therefore we don't say them Mizmor. So that's why on Erev Pesach, and on Chol HaMoed Pesach, and on Erev Yom Kippur, we don't say it. Okay. According to the Minhag Sfarad, you would still say Mizmor Todah in these days, Mipnei she'ikaro l'shevach voda'ah v'lo keneged Korban Todah. Okay, but we follow our Minhag that it corresponds to the Korban, and therefore we don't say it. Ketvu HaGeonim. Furthermore, the Geonim added, Sheyesh nagim lomar vayevalech David. This is the collection of psukim that we say before Shirat Hayam, right? That comes from Divrei Hayamim and Ezra Nehemiah. V'Shirat Hayam, Asher Shalom Moshe Bnei Yisrael Hashem. V'omnam ikar Pesukei deZimra Mishrei David. Right? The essence, as we've already explained, comes from the songs which are written by David HaMelech in Tehillim, and that's what we say in Baruch Shama. Those are the words that we say, right? We say B'Shirei David Avdecha Na'alecha, words of David, your servant. Nonetheless, למה בתקופת הגאונים היו שנהגו להוסיף פסוקים מהתורה מנחמיה, בסוף תקופת הראשונים כבר נהגו הכל לא אומרים. So again, these additional psukim that started off, there were those who added it in until it became a common practice and the common minhag, and that's what we do now. Okay. Minhagim v'kavanah different customs that we have when it comes to reciting Pesukei deZimra. So it says in the Shulchan Aruch, omrim et hazmilot b'nachat v'lo b'milutza. Many people don't know this halakha. Okay, but that's obviously everything is in context, and there's a certain amount of time that we have to daven, and people need to get to work, etc. So if we're not going to be able to say it, really, but strictly speaking, you should start saying it earlier. So you should have enough time. What happens? We'll get to this as well. But what happens? A person comes to shul. Not even a person comes late, but a person comes on time. People comes early, but you can't keep up. You can't keep up with the chazan, and you need to say. So it says in the Shulchan Aruch as well. It says tov me'at tachnunim b'kavanah me'arbeit tachnunim below kavanah. Right? That's we say that it's better to say fewer things. And now that we've understood sort of the establishment and the development of the Pesukei deZimra, if a person is going to really rush through to make sure that what's more important, saying everything or saying it properly? The answer is again, those who go according to the Kabbalah. And there's a certain order of things, and a very, very makbid to make sure you say everything in order, even at the expense of other things. But otherwise, we would say that it's more important to be able to say with kavanah rather than to actually say everything. And that means if a person davens at a certain pace, the chazan goes much quicker. I'm not going to be able to say all the prakim. That's okay. I would say even a katchila, that's okay. But you should say what you can say with kavanah. Obviously, there's a certain order of priority and there's a certain basic minimum. Again, we'll get to that. It's interesting when there was a famous quote of Rav Hutner. So the Shulchan Aruch says, as I mentioned already, tov me'at tachnunim b'kavanah. It's better to say less with more kavanah than me'arbeit tachnunim below kavanah, than to say more without kavanah. Right? So I heard it in the name of Rav Hutner. He said, tov me'at tachnunim below kavanah me'arbeit tachnunim below kavanah. He says, better to say fewer things without kavanah than to say more things without kavanah. Many people just try and rush it off as quickly as we can. So we don't need to rush it off as quickly as we can. And if you need to skip, you have to know what to skip. You have to know how to skip. But if you come on time and you can't keep up, so then it's okay to skip. But to say it, make sure that we say these things with the kavanah. מפני מעלתה מיוחדת של ברכת ברוך שאמר, שרומזת לעניינים עליונים. ברוך שאמר, that we begin Pesukei deZimra with, there's many lofty things that are included in it, and therefore the custom is lomra ba'amidah. Our custom is to stand when we say it. L'minhag Ashkenaz, omdim gam b'kat yishtabach. Our custom as well is to stand for yishtabach because that is the bracha that is closing off Pesukei deZimra. L'minhag Sfarad ein omdim. V'chen hagu la'amod v'vayivarach David ad asher bacharta be'Avraham. At that section of Vayivarach David we stand as well. Different reasons why are given why we stand. The reason he brings here, he says because of the kvodah shel malchut Yisrael. It's the honor of the kingship of Israel that was established by David HaMelech. We learned this last time, that we say Ashrei for two reasons. One of them is why Ashrei specifically was established, and it's so central because we say the pasuk, Potech et yadecha u'maspia l'chol chai ratzon. Therefore, tzarich lomar pasuk zeh b'kavanah. This verse needs to be said with intent. If you say it and you don't realize that you said it, or you just you can't remember, you didn't have any intention, you have to go back and say it again. Even if you realize you're halfway through the next set of prakim, nonetheless, this is the most important, the most central verse in all of Pesukei deZimra. Even though you've gone further, but you realize you should go back and say it. And there are those who say, since one did not have intent, did not have kavanah with the main pasuk, those who say, therefore, everything else is a subsidiary and you haven't really achieved anything. So there are those who say, this opinion is brought in the Mishnah Berurah, that if you did not have kavanah when saying the verse of Potech et yadecha, go back and say it and continue from there. However, according to most of the other poskim, it's enough just to go back and say that parak itself. Okay, so let's start. We don't have enough time to finish this, but let's start the next section, which is Dinei Hafsaka Pesukei deZimra. What about interrupting? What about stopping? You're in the middle of Pesukei deZimra, somebody comes up and talks to you, or more common, let's say you're a bit slower than the Chazan, right? He gets to Netz Kaddish or Kedusha or whatever. When can you stop and what can you stop? So kevanchet, so this is what I alluded to earlier, that if you daven Nusach Sfard, which begins with Hodu, so then it's less of a problem. Before you get to Baruch Shamar, you can interrupt with whatever you need to, it's Kaddish, etc. But by us, once you start Baruch Shamar, so we're in the section of Pesukei deZimra. Kevan sheberkat Baruch Shamar bracha shelifnei Pesukei deZimra. Since it begins with this bracha, and Yishtabach, and it concludes with the bracha of Yishtabach, we view, therefore, all of Pesukei deZimra as one unit. You have an opening bracha and you have a closing bracha, just as when you have a mitzvah or whatever it is, where you say the bracha and you can't interrupt between the bracha and what it's you're saying it for. So too, when it comes to Pesukei deZimra, you can't interrupt between the brachot, between this unit. Omnam. But we have to know again, Pesukei deZimra, we're not, when we get later on davening, Kriyat Shema, Amida, etc. So those obviously have much more stringent rules in terms of a hefsek. So Pesukei deZimra is actually the most lenient. So what does that mean? Letzorach gadol, kagon lemnoa hefsed mutar lafsik b'dibur. So it's brought that for a great need, a case of great loss, you're allowed to interrupt. V'chein kedei lemnoa elbon mutar lomar shalom. For that, during Pesukei deZimra, in order to avoid insult, you are allowed to say, you're allowed to greet someone. הנצרך להתפנות באמצע פסוקי דזמרה, יתפנה ואחר כך יברך אשר יצר וימשיך במאמר פסוקי דזמרה. Right, a person needs to go relieve oneself in the middle of Pesukei deZimra. At this point, you can say the bracha of Asher Yatzar. That is not considered a abstract. That's not allowed. Im shama be'emtza Pesukei deZimra brachot or kaddish. Okay, what if you're in the middle of Pesukei deZimra and then you hear somebody saying kaddish or you hear somebody saying a bracha? So lo yaneh baruch hu baruch shmo. You will not answer baruch hu baruch shmo. Ava amen mutar la'anot. But you can answer amen. V'af shemutar la'anot amen en chova la'anot. You're allowed to answer amen. You're not required to. Sho'ir v'osek b'mitzvat amen Pesukei deZimra. Patur me'mitzvah la'anot dvarim acherim shebikdusha. He says, since a person is currently engaged in the mitzvah of saying Pesukei deZimra, you don't have to stop, but you can stop to answer amen. ומי שמכוון כראוי בפסוקי דזמרה והפסקה לעניית אמן תטריד את כוונתו. So, if a person is able to concentrate and you're able to have kavanah, and you know that if you are saying it and you're gonna stop in the middle. By the way, this is not talking about somebody. If I'm saying Pesukei deZimra, now the chazan and the tzibur has already gone further and they're on Yishtabach, right? That's a different question. Meaning, at a certain point, we would say yes. A person should skip and should, in order to catch up with the tzibur and to continue praying with them as well. But this is talking about it. Maybe there's a minyan nearby, or there's somebody next to you saying bracha, or whatever it is. So he says, if you know that you're now saying Pesukei deZimra, but you're able to concentrate, because you're already in a better situation than most people. But you're going to stop to answer amen, and then each time you're going to forget where you were, and so then better just to carry on davening, better as you are. Okay, but if you have the tzibur saying kedusha or something else, okay, so that's something else. We'll stop there. We'll carry on. We'll carry on with that tomorrow. Rabbi Hanania ben Akash Omer, רצה הקדוש ברוך הוא לזרקות ישראל, לפי כך בא להם תורה ומצוות, שני אמר אדוני יכבד זמן צדקו, יגדיר